Talking with Fifth People, my name is host Eric, and I am here with very special guest Chad Crandall, who has graciously come on to discuss a variety of topics with us, and who is displaying the ability of the ENTJ to master FE. You're you're quite good at it, Chad. I got to tell you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, so do we want to start with questions? Are there any questions in the house for Chad Crandall, or I mean, you guys talk to me all the time, so.
I think it's quite silent over there right now, so I guess we can start talking, and if anything pops up.
Okay, let's talk decision making. So decision making is an interesting topic in particular because I've noticed a few different videos on the subject, including my own set of videos on decision making habits, and Zachary's recent video on disagreements and handling disagreements and stuff like that. And then there was a video that I made in comment to your ENTP video, in which I guess I was tired or something. I don't know. I felt like doing it, so I just did it. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about decision making. Obviously, decision making is a big issue for the ENTP, and especially when we're younger, we tend to not only do that, but then pile on. Right? As you get older, you don't say let's throw good money after bad. You go, okay, well, how do I turn that into something different, So that's one of the changes the ENTP makes. What are your thoughts on decision-making in general, especially amongst the different NT types, INTJ, ENTP, ENTJ, and INTP?
Well, the thing I find that is very interesting about decision-making is that typically with the TJ personalities, and especially the NTJ personalities, there's a need for making decision in the given time frame, and it's achieving that objective in not necessarily the best manner, but what they see with the most efficient circumstances given that moment, because they're not comparing incoming data, let's say that incoming logic, with a reference or a frame point they've built with the past. Rather, they're comparing it with objective evidence now. And this is what leads to what they think is the best decision in the moment. Whereas having the insight of an NTP at times, even in my organization, I've recruited the insight of NTPs often in the sense of making a decision, because sometimes there's objective data that I'm not noticing now, but they use their internal logical framework to help make that decision more effective than it would be with just given the objective data I'm given in the moment, which I've always appreciated about using NTPs for that advantage too, and making my decision to be a little more sound and helping reinforce TI frameworks that I've built in the past as well.
Interesting. Courtney asks, in terms of personality growth, which function should an individual type focus on developing? Inferior, seventh slot, etc., or should one just go all out on developing first and second functions? Chad, I'll just say initially that I've expressed the notion that one should reject achieving balance in favor of structuring life to maximize one's ability to live in the 1-2 range and get payoff in 3. So that's my historical position, not necessarily my current position. But go ahead, Chad. Tell us what you think about it.
So I think the latter half of that statement, one should not go all out on developing the first and second functions. This doesn't lead to actual full perspective. Okay, so given any decision-making model that I've learned studying MBTI or even Jungian psychology, it's understanding making a decision using all functions and perspectives. For example, me being an NI user, if I don't look at a thing from a perspective of actual details, do you know how easy it is to miss details? And if you miss certain details, some of those details are actually pertinent in making decisions. And it's the same thing with considering human ethics. If you're making a decision purely on logic, what kind of consequences or ethical consequences are you going to have as a result of that decision? Typical decision-making models in MBTI include looking at sensing first, then moving to intuition, then looking at logic, pros and cons, cause and effect, and then thinking of the feeling consequence. MBTI definitely endorses use of all the functions and being able to stretch and flex as necessary depending on the circumstances of that situation. I do not believe in this theory of 1 and 2 being used. I don't know. I've never even heard it until actually yesterday. Somebody had talked about, I've learned that you should only focus on the top 2, and I'm thinking, well, that's not actually correct, because I had a discussion with someone the other day that, hey, they were claiming, okay, they say you're an ESTJ, not to me, but they're an ESTJ, And they're like, you know what, you should ignore ethics or ignore feeling in decision making. And I'm thinking, well, why do you want to do that? Why would you want to ignore those things? And that's where the real issue I have with the whole 1-2 thing is this particular person thought feelers were weak. People who used feeling preference were weak people. And because they didn't have the use of logic, or saying that someone should never use logic and they should focus on, say, an INFP shouldn't focus on logic ever, or structure or order, I don't think that leads to a comprehensive development, especially if they have goals or things they think they should fulfill. And I think that's a real challenge for them. And the answer to the question here is, which function should an individual type focus on developing? The answer to that is wherever you're weak. Wherever you struggle, wherever you have the inability to flex. For me, obviously, I've spent a lot of time developing FE because obviously working in business, if you can't keep your team together and you can't keep harmony amongst your team, it creates a lot of problems. And you can drive command and conquer as an STJ or an NTJ all day, but ultimately it's not going to work if you can't keep your team together. So it's wherever you're weak and where you need to stretch, absolutely. And MBTI endorses the concept of starting point. Your type is your starting point. It's where you start out as. And from that point, you learn to stretch and flex as necessary to other types.
Okay, well, I guess I would take a little bit of exception to some of what you're saying, but in general, I probably agree with a lot of that. I'd say that the core issue that one has to place first before anything else is number of hours in the day. So you have a certain finite number of hours in the day and a certain finite number of days on this earth. And you're going to spend your time doing a certain amount of self-development during those hours, and a certain amount of profit making, and a certain amount of enjoying family time if that's what you're into, and that sort of stuff. So when we talk about developing weaker functions, it's really a matter of making an assessment on where the barriers are in your life, and or what's giving you difficulties. So if the barrier, like for me, I think the barrier in talking with famous people was probably FE. So it wasn't so much, it was a little bit SI. I needed to organize my videos a bit, and I got them a little bit more organized. But I think for me to enable success or engagement, just more net engagement over time, requires me to be more attentive to FE stuff and to be more attentive to visual stuff. There's other aspects of thinking that are not type exactly related. There are types tend to align with either visual or auditory thinkers, but there are auditory and visual thinkers in each type. And so it's like Courtney is as far as I can tell, an auditory INTJ, and that I would consider a flip type INTJ because normally they're visual. And in this instance, I would say that it's important to say to yourself, okay, for example, I've come to accept that I want to better manage my 7th slot function. I want to better manage FI and understand its role in my own decision making. If you think about it, for an ENTP, FI is our 7th, so we're adversarial towards it, directly adversarial. And then SE is our 8th, so it's unconscious. So we're taking action in sort of we're just taking action. And it's 8th, so it's not like we're handicapped in that area. It's right near the surface. So we don't really have a problem taking a lot of action. But what that ends up happening is we've got actions being taken that don't necessarily conform with our feelings, but they conform with maybe our thinking. But that's why it's critical for the ENTP to develop a principalist worldview. And if you have a certain sort of principle of ethics, you know whether something or not is ethically permissible. Whether it's altruistic or advisable is a different matter entirely. And those are separate questions to adjudicate. But if you have, for example, a do not transgress basic universal law of morality, then it permits stuff that might otherwise seem to violate the constraints of feeling-based ethics that don't demand of themselves logical consistency. The only other thing I wanted to say about what was said there is, what should you develop? In my opinion, the best, in general, for most people, the best thing to do is to wrestle with their attitude towards their 7th function. To move from adversarial to at least standing back and going, this thing is a mystery. Let me see if I can understand it a little bit better. Now, how many hours a day should you spend trying? Should I spend all my time trying to feel? Hell no. But I should understand how my feelings may be motivating my actions without my conscious awareness, and I should understand that they matter. I should understand that at the end of the day, I will have those feelings even if I don't understand them, and I'm not actively choosing to feel them very often, or if I'm even running away from them. But they're there, and they're controlling me on some level and determining my motivations and such. And so I have to respect them. I think that, to me, if I was going to give one thing that would apply to everybody, would be, look at your attitude towards your seventh function.
I think that's definitely a fair assessment. Definitely struggled, me personally, with my seventh function as well. This is often why it's called the trickster adversarial function for that reason. Definitely SI has been a pain point for me for quite some time as well, kind of altering or even distorting hierarchical, archetypal models and saying that this is the way it should have been, and it actually played a role negatively in my life, and being able to embrace and accept that has often led to growth of the unconscious, and a lot of functions will come up with it. I think it's a great target point.
Okay. So when we're talking about decision making, of course, we're talking about not just what to do in a given situation, but how that plays out within the framework that naturally is going to be projected out by a given stack, right? So if I'm an FE Dom person, I'm going to frame things through don't do that, it's awkward, or it'll make that person feel uncomfortable, or it's not going to work. Or if I'm going to intellectualize it, I'm going to intellectualize it for psychological reasons. Like, this isn't going to work because this doesn't make other people feel good in a certain way, right? That framing is necessarily the case. So when we're talking about decision making, then is there a metric that we ought to ascribe to in general, or is the decision making metric that an individual ought to ascribe to specific to their type?
I think the challenge of that question is that there's so many variables when it comes to making the decision that it's hard to say one particular model works. My personal opinion, removed from MBTI what they teach in their published works, is that I think every type has a process in which they should follow that's unique to their type. As you make decisions quite differently than the way I might make decisions, but ultimately I think that we use similar criteria and using whether it's objective or subjective logical framework to make that decision. But ultimately I think that we need to use what we find most natural to ourselves, dependent on which variables are in the situation. If it's a human-based decision, then maybe I need to flex a little bit and consider using a little more of the feeling function to determine if that's a proper outcome for that particular decision. I try to use a metaphor often to kind of demonstrate the use of this particular decision-making function. And let's say that a lot of people may argue, let's talk about World War II and how it ended, with the Japanese dropping the atom bomb. If I look at the logical circumstances, the objective criteria, I can say, well, dropping the atom bomb was a really logical decision given the circumstances. But then again, you can look at subjective circumstances and saying the war would have ended anyway, given this criteria and this criteria and this criteria. So was it really a logical or illogical decision, or was it an inhuman or human-based decision? And this is where I think sometimes there really is no right answer. There's just the answer which was taken, and this is where the challenge for me is because, TJ, I want to narrow down to what is absolutely correct in the sense of that particular action and course of action, and sometimes it's hard to say. Or, drone strikes or something that's going on in today's current politics. Is it right or is it not right? And there's two sides of it. If it were easily proven as 1 + 1 = 2, then we wouldn't have so many debates. But that's where it's hard to say which decision is correct and which one's not. I think that we're going to make our decisions, and you're always going to have people that disagree with the mode that you use in making those decisions.
But my fundamental position is there is a single correct answer in terms of moral agency. It is determinate, and it is determinable. And I've yet to have anybody actually come up to me and present any reasons to presume that it's not correct. The problem isn't that we don't have a working model. The problem is that individual human beings are not demanding sufficient internal consistency of themselves to recognize that this model has primacy. Because we have a simple universal axiom that we can apply, which is basically thou shalt not transgress, don't commit aggression, don't violate the rights of another. We have a simple definition of what a right is. that which confers a duty upon another. We have universal agreement as to what single duty we are willing to confer upon ourselves as well as everybody else, and that is, thou shalt not transgress. And yet we refuse to behave in that fashion because of utilitarian justifications. People will say, well, we can't actually follow that principle in this instance because some predicted outcome. But those predictions are no more valid generally than alternative predictions, and even if they are in the specific area in which the prediction is being made, they fail to account for multiple variables that mean there are going to be unintended consequences. They don't count all the consequences when doing a metric and determining whether or not something actually was a good idea or not. They only count the consequences that they deem relevant, but there are lots of consequences that they might deem relevant. They're going to be relevant to the individuals experiencing them. So in that instance, we want to follow the simple principle and extrapolate out and construct policy accordingly, and have a set of trumps that if something doesn't meet this threshold, it's off limits entirely. Now, if they want to do something, they want to achieve this outcome, they have to find a way to do it that doesn't violate this threshold. And then we can have a series of ascending rules that function as trumps like that in order to determine what's permissible and what's not. That's the problem. There is a single right answer, but people are neither able to successfully argue that there's not, nor are they willing to change a worldview that has internalized so many assumptions that are false.
I think that you have a really strong and valid point there, and I can't argue against it because I think we don't tend to explore a lot of options because of the pressure of time, and so people tend to either not have the knowledge or the insight to be able to look at what the potential single right answer is due to the constraint of time, or people don't have the interest or even the self-efficacy to look at the variables involved in a situation. I do believe that there might be a correct answer for a lot of these, especially when it comes to an ethical dilemma, because ethics to me is very rational. It's not something that's totally irrational. I think there is a code that we use, but there's arguments among different people with ethical codes. Like you said, you have this utilitarianism versus non-consequentialism. And so which code of ethics do you adopt in the process? And that's where I think there's no agreement on.
Right, there's not, but here's the problem. The issue is not whether or not there's agreement. The issue is whether or not the issue in dispute is actually still in dispute. And my point is, I've encountered as much of the argumentation as I can possibly encounter. And as far as I can tell, the argument's been won by one side. The problem is, it's like gay marriage. There used to be a lot of arguments against it. And now everybody kind of agrees, well, yeah, I guess that's all bullshit, right? The reason is because those arguments lost often enough. The answer to this is when relativists lose their fights often enough. The problem is the smartest people tend towards relativism because they can understand, oh, well, this is how I can deconstruct this idea. And they start to gain a certain amount of faith in the notion that all ideas fall apart with enough scrutiny and with enough pressure put on them. But what I've discovered is that if you spend your entire life scrutinizing and putting pressure on every idea you encounter, eventually you get down to the bottom. And the core axiom doesn't break down. Thou shalt not transgress upon another. And it applies in very specific and concrete ways that are determinate. I mean, like you can say, yeah, that's what it means, that's what happens. So that's kind of my mission, basically, is to the extent that my mission is two things. One, I want to get like super famous so that everyone will like me, because we HPs care a lot about that. And then two, I care a lot about America, I care a lot about our citizen democracy. It's important to me. And I care a lot about liberty. I was raised by a father who talked to me about that a lot. I think as I get older, my SI starts to kick in. It matters to me more. And I care.
Well, you and I are on the same page on that for sure. I care a lot about what our current state of politics is as well. So definitely appreciate you sharing that with me. In the sense of what we need to do, I think you're right about looking at everything and scrutinizing and then not accepting, hey, this information's coming at me, so should I agree with it because everybody says it's okay. I've always had a natural skepticism toward those type of things, looking at data and going, yep, I guess everybody embraces me. Okay, I guess it's right. I guess it's true. I've always kind of tried to scrutinize things as well. And as I try, because there's a lot of things, sometimes it's hard to look at it from a different angle. I'm not the smartest person in the room, and I always appreciate being in that position. And so for me, I look at it in the ways I can, but I also come across other people who've looked at it in different ways, and that also helps, reorganize my framework on it as well. I see a lot of challenges with our current system, and I wish that we had taken a little more time to make decisions in the way that they should have been made, based on, hey, we're going to look at this public policy, here's how we're going to form it, But the question is, what is the intent behind these formations that these people are making when they form public policy? Is it because I want to make more money, or is it because it's the ethical thing to do? Are we ran truly by pure capitalism, or is it political corruption, or is it for the people? Are we still in a Republican?
Well, I mean, I think the problem is it's so tempting. We want to pick our leaders based on our perceptions regarding their intention. You know, it's like but I believe entirely that Bernie Sanders intended well. At the same time, he intended well to steal more of my money. And there's no other way to put it. I mean, you might say, well, the taxes are not stealing, Eric, and helping poor people go to college is not stealing, and blah, blah, blah. But when you actually start to scrutinize those arguments, they fall apart at the slightest touch. I mean, there's no justification for some other guy making a claim upon my property because he doesn't have it. That's the only justification, right? So, those kind of core principles, to me, are vastly more important than the people implementing them. And the whole point of a constitution is to constrain the individuals acting as agents of government to certain behaviors, to prevent other behaviors, and to make it such that individuals have the liberty to behave as they wish without having their property, wealth, good name, and everything else subject to seizure by the government.
You know,
I mean, that's
interesting
insane.
here. Yeah, I was just going to say, look at that comment. Property itself is theft. This is an interesting topic for you to. I'd love to hear your response on this personally. I want to. Yeah.
The meaning of the word theft is determined through the definition of property rights. Okay, that's how we know what theft is. That's how we know what the very definition of fair is by property rights. What makes something fair or not fair depends on an ownership claim. Everything does. I mean, it's insane to think that property is theft. If you go out and pick up a stick and you're holding it, you don't want to give it to somebody who come up and says, "Give me that stick," and they punch you in the face and take it from you. You're like, "Well, that was what I get for stealing that stick from the ground where nobody owned it." You operate on the assumption that we own property. All of your entire life is predicated on the notion that some things you have claim to and other things you don't have claim to, and yet you're going to say that it's theft, even though that makes you a lifelong criminal. You own your own body.
Yeah, well,
you're born a theft.
I'm definitely a criminal if that's the case.
Yeah. You're lucky. It's hard for ENTPs to achieve success on financial areas, really, because we're so scattered. But ENTJs have it easy because they always are like focused on, well, let me make bank, let me fucking do something big, so let me make a big splash. There aren't very many of you guys, you know. That's the thing.
Is this person an ENTP? Is that who you're referring to?
No, I'm saying ENTJs. ENTJs are super high achieving. I want to do something big. I want to attain security. I want to get wealth and keep it invested smartly and not waste people and stuff, right? But not waste money and stuff like that, and make sure I'm secure and all that kind of stuff. And so it's like it's a good type to be, you know, because it's the luckiest type to be, because you convert your energy into outcomes by nature. A lot of types have trouble with that. INTPs have a lot of trouble with that.
Right. I'm just reading these comments over here. Just answer Courtney's question. Me personally, if you're asking me, Courtney, you said, do you vote based on a candidate's platform or demonstrated character? It's not platform-based ever. It's not demonstrated character either. I don't really base it if I like this person or not. I base it on the fact of what policy do I think that aligns best with the policy that I think would be most effective. So it's not like, oh, this person's Republican, I'm just going to vote straight Republican across the board. It's not the case. For me, it's always it's about what the person represents in their public policy viewpoint. I don't really care.
That's their platform. That's their platform. Yeah. That is platform based. Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah. You're saying party platform versus candidate platform. Right. Okay, yeah, well, I'm the same way. I vote for candidates based on what I anticipate their policies will be. And sometimes I will not base that decision on what their stated policies are. So, like, I know I'd prefer actually to have Trump over Hillary, even though it's not based on any sort of stated policies of either of them. The reason I believe I'd rather have Trump than Hillary is because I anticipate that the answers of each represent more about what they will actually do than the words that represent what they'll actually do.
Right. Okay, so Akira wants us to respond to this particular comment here. So the reason I bring up the fact that property is theft, because most actually existing libertarian arguments are premised upon the idea that so-called laissez-faire capitalism is somehow voluntary and liberty-respecting. It is, of course, neither. The institutions that make laissez-faire capitalism, the institution of private property, especially, are imposed involuntarily on populations, whether they want them or not, and to the extent which involuntary impositions are enforced by violently attacking or other human beings when they don't comply, they are liberty-infringing.
No. You're completely ignoring the issue of who has the initial claim, as though it didn't matter. You're saying, I'm going to ignore the issue of who owns my own body. Who owns your body? Is it me? Do I own your body, Hami? Or Akira? Or no? Or do you own it yourself? Or is it unowned? Can I homestead you? Oh, we got an unowned land here. I'm going to go grab it. I'm going to build a. Oh, is that not you? I'm sorry, Akira. I thought Akira was another name that Hami used sometimes, but I guess I'm wrong. My mistake. I'm sorry about that, Akira. I mean, is your body owned or not? If it's not owned, look, the only way you understand whether or not a given claim is fair or not, the only way you understand whether or not somebody is having something stolen, the only way you understand whether or not an individual is a member of society that's treating them fairly is not a matter of whether or not it enforces just claims. I mean, look, you're saying, well, property rights are imposed upon you. Well, actually, we know that you own your own body because when you're born, everybody in the room has a duty not to smother you to death, even though you're screaming. Okay? So, where's that duty come from? Oh, it is you. Okay. So it's Hami fucking with us. Thanks, Hami. Appreciate that. That's hilarious. Yeah, that's INTJ humor at its finest right there.
I don't have the pleasure of knowing Hami, so I'm just going to take your word for it in this particular regard.
Yeah, he's an INTJ he and I have gotten into some battles, I tell you. Fur has flown. He actually normally argues more authoritarian position. Things like, one thing he's argued in the past has been the United States is to blame for conflict with Russia, and we should stay out of Russia's business and stay out of Ukraine and stuff. And we've had a battle over that. We had a battle over a couple of different things. So
but it looks like an accomplishment was made because he says that he actually agrees with you on this particular topic. That's
amazing. Thank you, Hami. I appreciate that. So, all right. Any other thoughts on MBTI stuff here? We began the topic with calling it decision making, but just turning a bit of a question and answer period here. If anybody else has any thoughts or questions they'd like to ask Chad, I'd be happy to hear them. I have some questions for you, Chad, actually, about just sort of YouTube stuff, which is, number one, like, when you started MBTV, did you know where you were going with it exactly, or did you kind of figure out as it developed?
It's an interesting question because, honestly, I was busy in my business when I started MBTV, and I thought, the only idea I had in my mind was, I got a lot of thoughts. I'm wondering if anybody thinks the same as I do. And it wasn't originally MBTV, it was just my name. It was just me. And as it grew, and I got near the 1,000 subscriber threshold, I renamed it. And I said, I need Trey's help. Trey can help me out with a lot of different angles of this, and we can actually grow this to be a little more informational than I'd originally anticipated. But it was a hobby for quite some time. Just putting videos up and seeing if any like minds, if I could impact anybody, if I could, get people to start thinking a little differently. There was a lot of information, a lot of misconstrued information on the internet, and I was like, okay, well, maybe if I can consolidate this information on a YouTube channel, it might help some people. So I did, and that was the original idea. It didn't take much time. I didn't edit my videos. I didn't, use high-quality HD. I pretty much just recorded a video, upload it, and it took about 10 minutes max to upload, and that was it. I didn't touch it for days, and weeks even. Then I would post another video, and I wouldn't touch it, so it didn't require much time. Now that it's a little more of a project, it takes a little more time. But no, that was the original synopsis when I started. It was just, I'm going to talk. Anybody's interested, great. If I'm not, then not great. I didn't really have a goal per se when I started it. It was just connecting to other people.
And I really think that's the way to start a YouTube channel, right? That if you go in thinking, I'm going to make a successful YouTube channel, you're going to end up being disappointed because from my experience, I experienced no success at all for a long time, right? Like I had 4 subscribers, and it was sort of just my brainstorming spot where I threw up ideas and stuff for me to reference later if I wanted to. I didn't really expect people to watch it. Some videos I'd even begin with saying, be aware this is going to be boring if you try to watch it, because I'm just sitting here going, I wonder what I think about,
Right.
which doesn't make for good media consumption, really. But ultimately, when I discovered that, when I happened to make one video about personality type stuff that was about ENTP, and it was mostly about how it's actually very difficult and struggle-y to be ENTP, regardless of what you read in the type descriptions, then that one did well, and I was shocked. I had a hard time believing it at first that people responded positively to it. So when that happened, I realized, it's possible that people might actually like me and want to see what I'm talking about. That's possible? Okay, well, I'm going to try to make them happy and try to encourage that behavior.
I thought the same thing. It came across me the same way. I was like, people actually want to hear what I have to say? Oh, okay. It was very shocking at first because I didn't expect anything.
Courtney asks, what is the most challenging aspect of facilitating these conversations in GoToMeeting? Getting myself to shut up. I mean, I don't find the facilitation of the conversation difficult at all. The problem I have is achieving the right FE balance, where I'm both limiting myself to what people consider socially the right amount of talking, including the others, defining those rules ahead of time to a certain extent, so that certain conversations that might be, okay, on this video, I'm going to talk for this long, and then I'm going to open up for question and answer. And if people know ahead of time that's what it's supposed to be, fine. But people want to watch these videos and know from an FE level that they're in safe hands, that they're not going to be exposed to awkwardness, that they're not going to be exposed to really horrifically bad media decisions that make them cringe and or feel like they're wasting their time. And the more comfortable they are in your hands as a media producer, the more likely they are to watch multiple of your videos, because it's a comfortable experience for them. So I had to learn to adjust my FE and stuff to be more appealing, more likable, and more attentive to those matters. Chad, do you incorporate other people besides Trey? You do. I've seen other faces on your channel, right?
I've just interviewed several people, but as far as like behind the scenes, Trey's the only one as this point. I tried not to get too much of a bias and say, hey, oh, you know what, ENTJs, let's bring them all on, and I try not to do that. Again, I don't really have a bias as in one type's better than another type in that regard. I think every type's unique in its own way, and I try to value all types. It just so happened that Trey happened to be an ENTJ, and we got along really well as a result of him being an ENTJ, obviously. That made it to where we're like, okay, we kind of have a direction I think we can take this and, provide value at the same time. I don't know if you study a lot of Enneagram or not, but is that something you've dove into?
A little bit. I don't feel like any kind of expert on it, but I usually have to look again at the numbers, see what they mean and stuff like that. But yeah, I consider myself, my tri-type to be 783.
Right. And so for me, I have the same tri-type. I'm a 3-7. I'm an 8-7-3. So this is where you and I guess we have a lot of similarity. Whereas Trey's quite different. He leads with 3, and so he's got this a little more, hey, everybody likes Trey personality, which works really well. For me, it's a little more of I can be very stoic on my videos and less personality, and where that's to me, it's just get that information out there as quickly as possible. And Trey has a little more of a personal feel to it, which is great.
Is he a mover shaker as well? What are these numbers? Enneagram has descriptions that say if you have your first description type is a number 1 through 9, and it's a descriptive model, really. It's not predictive. So it's just a way of summarizing sets of behaviors. 7 means you're an enthusiast, you want to play first, basically. 8 means you're ready to throw down, and 3 means you want to attain externally verifiable good outcomes, like social status, wealth, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think Trey, if I'm not mistaken, he'll correct me on this, but I believe that he's a 359. I think he's like a 359.
Well, that
And
makes sense. That makes
yeah,
sense. He has that investigative quality to him.
right. He's sometimes he gets so investigative. I'm like, all right, Trey, I just want to have some fun. You know,
Right.
he dives in deep and he starts talking to me really deep about a topic, and I'm like, you know, I'm in fun mode right now. I got to do something else. I got to do something exciting or silly.
Trey, listen here, Trey. I'm a mover and a shaker, okay? That's my tri type. So I'm busy moving over here and I'm shaking. And, get your nose out of those books and come move and shake with me.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. Trey's like that though. He's when he gets deep into a topic, he calls me with all kinds of theories, which is awesome. You know, and he helps shape perspective because he dives really deep into certain theories and concepts. And I'm thinking, okay, well, what can I do with this information? What organization can I build with this information? If it's not useful, then I'll hear about it another time when we can sit down and talk about it. But right now, I've got to get this done and this done and this done. And so I guess that's a little bit different in our personality, but I think it really results in a nice little balance on our particular channel.
yeah, I mean, I think you guys are obviously good partnership. You guys work together well and everything. I, of course, have a corollary individual working with me, which is Zachary. And my thing on bringing on Zachary on board and having him be my other guy, as you have another guy, is multiple. But of course, INTPs and ENTPs get along really well. Unlike ENTJ, who sounds like get along fine, ENTP don't necessarily get along well unless one of them's a lot further along in development and the younger one is willing to put on the learner's hat, which is always a questionable matter for ENTPs. When we finally do it in life, we learn how empowering it is. But for a long time, we just want to be right. We don't care what you're trying to teach us. We'll learn it by accident as we're arguing against it. You know.
What is your approach to typical conflict when it comes to let's say debate? Is it your objective to win, or is it your objective to gain knowledge? What is your typical mindset when you're entering any kind of debate?
It depends on the nature of the debate. If I'm talking with famous people and I'm debating an issue I care about, then or I actually have a position on, and there's some things I have more firm positions on than others, but then I have to assess how I want to roll into it. You got to basically, in general, somebody's got to earn past me being neg before I'm going to be af. So it's like you go ahead and present your ideas, I'll tear them to pieces, and then if they withstand my scrutiny, then I'll give you my case. In the
Right, that
meantime,
sounds fair.
yeah. In the meantime, you haven't met the threshold. So, that's my take on debates in GoToMeeting in general. If it's something I don't care about, I may just take the other side for kicks, and just and even if it's something I do care about, I might, in theory, take the other side as a demonstration of how to switch frameworks or something. But
Right.
yeah, but with debate with my kids, of course, I'm only trying to get them to win. That's an actual competition sport, so that's a somewhat different matter. When I get the kids to go compete in debate tournaments, I want them to have the best case. I want other people to encounter their case and go, "What? I have no idea what to do with that," And so I need them to be able to argue their case better than the opponents can argue their case, and I need them to be able to argue both sides better than their opponents can argue both sides. So then they have to prep out for both sides, and it's necessarily not preferencing one side of the resolution over the other as a basic matter. However, I will also give them arguments that are consistent with my basic views, especially libertarian shit, rights-based arguments. I do a lot of that.
Yeah. My objective is always a little different. I would say that for most of the time, I don't really care about the win per se. I more care about closure, having the conflict end and getting it over with. Whether it's to gain knowledge or whether it's to get a point across or not get a point across, it's usually about closure. That's what I'm really seeking when I get into a conflict. I don't like open-ended. It can't stay open-ended. It's got to have some kind of end. Even if it's a loss or a win or whatever, it's got to be closed.
Well, that's a sign of ENTJ courage as well, because first of all, let me just say that as an ENTP, I tend to avoid at a certain point in a conflict. I go, what have I gotten myself into here? And I tend to avoid, because I don't want to have to be compelled to view this through a feelings-based angle. Okay. And then the second thing I said, which hopefully will provide some of this closure, is I'm sorry for being mean like that. It wasn't okay. It wasn't cool of me. I apologize.
Oh, well, thank you. I never took it that way. I thought it was actually pretty funny. I'm pretty open about most criticisms, and so it's all good on my end.
The reason I know it wasn't cool is because, like, the one I made about a commenter last night, where I kind of tore him to pieces, I can watch that and enjoy it, and think that it's fair, and I put a handle on it, and I busted his chops, but it's fair. And I can't rewatch your video without cringing, because it doesn't feel fair to me, and that's a feelings-based thing that I think is indicative of kind of what you're saying about the importance of incorporating feelings in decision making. It is important,
Right.
And it's important to understand how you're going to feel later, and just because something meets my threshold for not morally impermissible doesn't mean that it's nice. And I do believe that individuals are experience life more enjoyably when they decide to be kind instead of mean, and or at least to be fair when they're being mean.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And see, both of us being the ENT, I think we've went through our life kind of, bulldozing over people in the sense of using hard logic or facts or things like that. And as I've gotten older, I realize how much it doesn't work in my favor when I'm not thinking of it consciously. Like, okay, you need to consider this person's feelings. Sometimes it doesn't result in the best outcome. I think that being hard and direct or tough love or whatever is going to result in some kind of positive effect, and it really doesn't sometimes. I'm like, it's common sense, why did you do it this way? Instead, you could have done it this way, or that's a really stupid decision. And being so blunt, I realized tearing people down wasn't always the most effective way. And it's kind of what really aimed my focus. Okay, let's focus on the human side of this, and let's focus on the humanity side. And I think that's where a lot of we've lost a lot of our focus as a society too. Given our time away to, say, technology and everything sped up. It's like, how well are we and how good are we at building relationships with each other versus, hey, I don't have the time for you anymore because I can talk to 13 people at one time via text message or whatever, and so I don't spend a lot of time with these people anymore. And I think we've really lost that human edge. And I'm thinking, I don't want to follow the same fate, so let me focus on the humanity side. Let me focus on the ethical side of what we're, as we should develop, say, 50 or 100 years ago as it was. And I think we've lost that element. And I wonder what kind of impact that's going to leave on future development, not in technology, but in relationships themselves as a whole, or a generic sense.
Well, I really do think a couple of things. One, that it depends. We need to be talking about ethical stuff, but that to the extent that we're going back and forth with utilitarian and deontological or binary frameworks and trying to decide which one's better, to me, that's legitimizing util as a model. However, we also understand that on certain other matters that aren't about objectively what's morally impermissible and what's not morally impermissible, then in those situations we do need to factor in utilitarian considerations. The other thing I would say is that it depends on the intention of the individual, also on how one does the post-act framings. So in the end, whereas my video may have been mean and I might have concluded that makes me cringe a bit, and I think I ought not to have done it exactly that way anyway. And while I might think that, my intention was never to engage in any tough love, right? My intention was to, I guess, establish dominance or something. I'm not really sure what my intention was. That's always a question I'm uncertain about. But the point is, in the end, even though that intention may have been ill-advised, the act ended up prompting us coming together, and it humanized both of us. As you come in and talk about prioritization of ethics as an ENTJ, and I demonstrate the prioritization of objective self-criticism as an ENTP, and we reach some sort of consensus here at the end that ultimately the engagement is what matters, and the ability of two individuals to either see eye to eye or to respectfully treat each other in the exchange of ideas as equal autonomous agents, human beings. And so, I think that's a good note to end on. So I think we'll end it right there.
Perfect.
Thank you for watching Talking with Famous People, and it's always see, I need to think about this better, right? I need to time my ending so that I've already minimized this window and everything, because when I'm recording, the computer goes super slow. So pretend this last part didn't happen, viewing audience, and just end it where I ended really cool like that, okay? Thanks for watching. See you later.